The air hung heavy, thick with the scent of damp earth and something else. Something metallic like old blood, clinging to the ancient oak trees that guarded the entrance to Blackwood Manor. I'd seen pictures, of course, the grand Victorian facade with its skeletal branches reaching like grasping claws against a perpetually gray sky. But pictures, I was quickly learning, did not capture the feel of the place. They didn't convey the oppressive silence, broken only by the rustle of unseen leaves and the frantic beat of my own heart. My name is Elias Thorne, and I'm a man who chases echoes. A paranormal investigator, some call me, others a charlatan. I prefer to think of myself as a seeker of truths, however unsettling they may be. And Blackwood Manor, with its century-long history of disappearances, madness, and whispers of a pervasive darkness, promised truths in abundance. The iron gates, rusted and groaning, swung inward with a shriek that seemed to tear the very fabric of the twilight. My old pickup truck, usually a bastion of comforting familiarity, felt suddenly small and vulnerable as I drove slowly up the winding, overgrown driveway. The house loomed larger with every turn, its windows like vacant eyes staring out from a skull. I had been hired by the distant descendant of the Blackwood family, a nervous, gaunt woman named Mrs. Albright, who spoke in hushed tones of family curse and things that won't stay buried. She offered an exorbitant sum, enough for me to overlook my usual caution. "Just tell me what it is," she had pleaded, her voice barely a whisper over the phone. "Tell me why no one can stay there for more than a week without changing." Changing, the word had sent a chill down my spine, even then. I parked the truck near the front steps, the engine dying with a final shudder that echoed eerily in the stillness. The front door, a massive slab of dark wood, stood slightly ajar, as if inviting me in, or perhaps daring me. A cold draft snaked out, carrying with it that faint, metallic tang. My equipment sat heavy in the passenger seat. EMF meters, thermal cameras, voice recorders, a trusty old flashlight. Tools of the trade, designed to quantify the unquantifiable. But as I stepped out onto the gravel, the air growing colder, I felt a familiar prickle on my skin that no device could measure. It was the feeling of being watched, not by human eyes, but by something ancient and patient. I pushed the door open further. Inside, the grand foyer was swallowed by shadows. Dust motes danced in the slivers of fading light that pierced through the grimy stained glass window above the staircase. The air was stale, heavy with the scent of decay and something else, something sweet and sickly like forgotten flowers. "Hello?" My voice, usually steady, cracked slightly as it bounced off the high ceilings and vanished into the gloom. No answer, of course, only the sound of my own breathing, suddenly too loud in the oppressive silence. I flicked on my powerful flashlight, its beam cutting through the darkness like a surgical knife. It illuminated a vast, empty space, once opulent, now stripped bare. The floorboards groaned under my weight as I stepped inside, each creak echoing like a warning. My first instinct was to set up my base camp in the foyer near the door. Easy access, a quick escape if necessary. But something pulled me deeper. A subtle, almost imperceptible hum in the air, like a distant, forgotten melody. It drew me towards the grand staircase, its banister intricately carved with grotesque faces that seemed to sneer in the shifting light. Each step I took was deliberate, my boots thudding softly on the worn wood, a sound that seemed to be swallowed by the vast emptiness of the house. The air grew perceptibly heavier with each footfall, pressing down on me, making my lungs work harder. The grotesque faces on the banister seemed to twist and contort in the flickering beam of my flashlight,
their silent snares growing more pronounced, almost mocking my intrusion. I could almost feel their cold, stony gazes following me as I slowly ascended, drawn by that inexplicable hum, a siren song of the supernatural. As I ascended the stairs, the temperature dropped noticeably. My breath plumed in front of me. The EMF meter, usually quiescent unless in the presence of strong electrical fields, began to flicker erratically, then spiked. A low, guttural hum emanated from it, growing louder with each step. Second floor. The landing was even darker, the windows boarded up, trapping the shadows within. The air here was different, colder, and the metallic scent was stronger, almost overpowering. It was here that I first heard it. A whisper. It was faint, barely audible, like dry leaves skittering across a stone floor. It seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, a disembodied sigh that brushed against my ears. I froze, my heart hammering against my ribs. Hello? I tried again, my voice a strained whisper this time. The whisper came again, closer now, a sibilant hiss that seemed to coil around me. It wasn't words, not exactly, more like a sound trying to form words, a desperate ancient plea or a malicious taunt. My flashlight beam danced across the walls, revealing peeling wallpaper, faded portraits with eyes that seemed to follow me, and closed doors. One door, at the very end of the long hallway, stood slightly ajar, a sliver of inky blackness visible within. The EMF meter screamed, its needle buried in the red. The air grew impossibly cold, and a shiver, not of cold, but of pure dread, ran down my spine. The metallic scent was now so strong it made my eyes water. And then I saw it. A shadow, deeper than the surrounding darkness, detached itself from the gloom at the end of the hallway. It was tall, impossibly thin, and seemed to ripple at the edges like smoke. It didn't move so much as flow towards me, soundlessly, relentlessly. My rational mind screamed at me to run, to turn and flee this place, but my feet were rooted to the spot, my breath caught in my throat. The whisper grew louder, more insistent, and now I could almost make out a single, repeated word echoing from the depths of the shadowy figure. Mine. The shadow was almost upon me, its form coalescing, revealing two pinpricks of crimson light that could only be eyes. The cold was unbearable, a physical weight pressing down on me. I raised my flashlight, my hand trembling, ready to swing it like a weapon. But before I could, a different sound erupted from the depths of the house. A low, mournful wail, like a child crying, but twisted, ancient, and filled with an unimaginable sorrow. It was so unexpected, so raw, that the shadowy figure paused, its form wavering. And in that brief moment of distraction, my legs finally obeyed. I turned and ran, stumbling down the grand staircase, the wail echoing behind me, chasing me, a symphony of dread. I burst out of the front door, gasping for air, the metallic scent still clinging to my clothes, the whisper still ringing in my ears. I didn't stop until I was back in my truck, fumbling with the keys, my hands shaking so violently I could barely insert them into the ignition. The engine roared to life, a blessed sound, and I sped down the driveway, leaving Blackwood Manor, its secrets and its horrors behind me. Or so I thought. As I glanced in the rearview mirror, the house was a dark silhouette against the fading light. But in one of the upper windows, a faint crimson glow pulsed, like a watchful eye. And for a fleeting second I saw it, a pale, gaunt face pressed against the glass, its mouth open in a silent scream. And I knew, with a chilling certainty, that Blackwood Manor wasn't done with me. The drive back was a blur. The winding country roads, usually a source of calm, felt like a labyrinth designed to trap me. Every shadow cast by the passing trees seemed to morph into the gaunt face in the window. Every rustle of leaves a continuation of the chilling whisper. I gripped the steering wheel so tightly my knuckles ached, my eyes darting to the rearview mirror every few seconds, half expecting to see Blackwood Manor, defiant and malevolent, still looming behind me. When I finally pulled into the driveway of the dilapidated motel I'd booked an hour's drive away, the first rays of dawn were painting the sky in sickly shades of gray and bruised purple. I stumbled out of the truck, my legs feeling like lead, and practically fell into the motel room. The cheap, sterile air, the faint smell of disinfectant, and the hum of the ancient air conditioner were a stark, almost comforting contrast to the oppressive decay of the manor. I collapsed on the lumpy bed, my heart still racing. Sleep was a distant, impossible concept. Every time I closed my eyes, the image of the shadowy figure, its crimson pinprick eyes, and the pale, screaming face in the window flashed behind my eyelids. The whisper, "Mine," echoed in my ears, intertwining with the mournful ancient wail. I spent the next few hours pacing the cramped room, drinking stale coffee and trying to rationalize what I had experienced. My scientific training, my years of debunking hoaxes and explaining away natural phenomena screamed at me to dismiss it. It was exhaustion, fear, and overactive imagination fueled by the manor's reputation. But the prickle on my skin, the undeniable drop in temperature, the EMF meter screaming in my hand, these were not things I could easily explain away. And then there was the wail, the raw, primal sound of sorrow that had momentarily distracted the shadow. It felt different, not malicious like the whisper, but filled with an unbearable anguish. It was a sound that resonated deep within me, stirring a strange sense of pity amidst the terror.
By midday, the initial shock began to wear off, replaced by a gnawing sense of professional failure. I was Elias Thorne, the man who faced the unknown. Running was not in my nature. More importantly, Mrs. Albright had paid me a substantial sum, and I had promised her answers. What kind of investigator would I be if I fled at the first sign of genuine paranormal activity? The thought of returning sent a fresh wave of dread through me, but it was quickly followed by a surge of grim determination. I had to go back. Not just for Mrs. Albright, but for myself. I needed to understand. I needed to know what changed people in Blackwood Manor. I spent the rest of the day reviewing my notes, researching the Blackwood family history online, and meticulously checking my equipment. The internet was a treasure trove of local legends and whispered tales, each one more horrifying than the last. Disappearances of servants, the sudden madness of a Blackwood heir, a fire that inexplicably consumed an entire wing of the house, leaving no trace of its inhabitants. All of it pointed to a deep, pervasive malevolence. One recurring detail caught my attention: the children. Several accounts mentioned children of the Blackwood family, or those who worked there, vanishing without a trace or being found in states of catatonia, whispering about the cold lady or the shadow man. The mournful wail I had heard, could it be connected to them? As dusk approached, a new kind of resolve settled over me. This wasn't just a job anymore, it was personal. I packed my gear, adding a few extra batteries, a stronger headlamp, and a small antique silver cross that my grandmother, a devout woman, had given me years ago. I wasn't religious, but a little symbolic protection couldn't hurt. The drive back to Blackwood Manor felt different this time. The dread was still there, a cold knot in my stomach, but it was quickly followed by a surge of grim determination. I was no longer just an observer, I was a participant in the manor's dark drama. The iron gates, still ajar, seemed to mock my return. The house loomed, even more menacing in the deepening twilight.
This time, I didn't hesitate. I parked the truck, grabbed my gear, and walked purposefully towards the front door. The metallic scent was stronger now, a cloying sweetness beneath it that made my stomach churn. The air was heavy, charged with an unseen energy. As I stepped over the threshold, the silence inside was almost deafening, a palpable presence that pressed in on me. I decided to start systematically. I would go room by room, floor by floor, documenting everything. I began in the foyer, setting up a static camera to record the main entrance, then moved into the grand drawing room off to the left. It was a cavernous space, filled with draped furniture, like shrouded ghosts. The air was thick with dust, and the silence was broken only by the faint, rhythmic tick of my EMF meter, a constant reminder of the unseen forces at play.
As I moved deeper into the drawing room, my flashlight beam sweeping across the cobweb-draped chandeliers and the faded tapestries on the walls, I noticed something peculiar. On a small, ornate side table, half hidden beneath a dusty sheet, was a single withered rose. Its petals were brown and brittle, but it was undeniably a rose, placed there with deliberate intent. It seemed out of place, a fragile symbol of life amidst so much decay. I reached out, my fingers brushing against the dry petals. As I did, the air around me grew colder, and the EMF meter in my pocket began to hum louder, its needle twitching violently. A faint, almost imperceptible whisper brushed against my ear, closer than before, like someone breathing directly into my ear. This time, I heard words, clear, distinct, and filled with a chilling sorrow. She waits. My blood ran cold. I spun around, my flashlight beam cutting through the darkness, but there was nothing. Just the draped furniture, the shadows, and the overwhelming sense of an unseen presence. The rose, however, seemed to pulse with a faint, almost imperceptible light, a ghostly luminescence that faded as quickly as it appeared. "Who waits?" I demanded, my voice trembling despite myself. The only answer was the sudden, violent slam of the drawing room door behind me, plunging the room into near total darkness, save for the narrow beam of my flashlight. The sound reverberated through the house, a deafening clap that echoed into the oppressive silence. I was trapped. I was trapped. The sudden, violent slam of the drawing room door behind me echoed through the vast, dark space, a final, definitive punctuation mark to the chilling whisper. She waits. My heart hammered against my ribs, a frantic drumbeat in the suffocating silence. The beam of my flashlight, the only source of light, seemed to shrink, barely pushing back the encroaching gloom. Panic, cold and sharp, clawed at my throat. I lunged back towards the door, fumbling for the handle. It was cold, metallic, and stubbornly unmoving. Locked. Or perhaps something far worse than locked. I pushed, I pulled, I rattled it with all my might, but it remained sealed, an impenetrable barrier. The silence that followed my futile efforts was even more terrifying than the slam itself, a pregnant stillness that seemed to mock my helplessness. "Hello?" My voice was a desperate croak, swallowed by the cavernous room. The only answer was the faint, rhythmic tick of my EMF meter, a chilling counterpoint to my ragged breathing. And then, the air grew even colder, a bone-deep chill that seeped into my very marrow. The metallic scent intensified, now mingled with that sickly sweet aroma, making my head swim. My flashlight beam,
still trembling in my hand, swept across the room. The draped furniture, previously inanimate, seemed to shift in the periphery of my vision, their shrouded forms taking on unsettling shapes. Was it just my imagination, or were the shadows deepening, coalescing into something more substantial? Then I heard it again, the whisper. But this time, it wasn't a disembodied hiss. It was closer, clearer, and it seemed to emanate from the withered rose on the side table. "She waits for you." The words were drawn out, a morbid lullaby laced with an ancient sorrow.
My gaze snapped to the rose. It pulsed again with that faint, ghostly luminescence, brighter this time, casting an ethereal glow on the dusty sheet beneath it. As I watched, mesmerized by the macabre beauty, the petals of the withered rose began to unfurl, slowly, unnaturally, revealing not the fresh, vibrant bloom of life, but a deeper, darker brown, almost black at its core. And from that deepening blackness, a faint, translucent mist began to rise, swirling and coiling like a phantom breath. It drifted upwards, slowly forming a vague humanoid shape above the table. It was indistinct at first, a shifting veil of shadow and light, but as it grew, a horrifying familiarity began to emerge. It was the pale, gaunt face from the window. But now, it was complete. A spectral woman, her form shimmering, her eyes hollow pits of despair, her mouth open in a silent, agonizing scream. Her hair, long and dark, seemed to writhe like tendrils of smoke around her face. She was clad in what looked like a tattered, antique gown, its fabric dissolving into wisps of mist. The EMF meter shrieked, its needle pinned to the maximum. The cold was excruciating, a freezing embrace that stole my breath. I couldn't move, couldn't scream, couldn't even blink. I was a deer caught in the headlights, utterly paralyzed by the sheer, overwhelming horror of the apparition before me. You are the cold lady," I managed to whisper, the words barely audible. The spectral woman didn't speak, but her silent scream seemed to intensify, a soundless shriek that vibrated in my very bones. Her translucent hand, long and skeletal, slowly reached out towards me. As it did, the air around it shimmered, and the withered rose on the table crumbled into a pile of black dust. A wave of profound sorrow washed over me, a grief so deep and ancient it felt like my own. It wasn't just her sorrow, it was the accumulated despair of everyone who had ever suffered in this house. I felt tears prick my eyes, tears that weren't my own. And then, another sound, the mournful wail. It erupted from the depths of the house, closer now, echoing through the drawing room, a desperate childlike cry. The spectral woman's outstretched hand faltered. Her hollow eyes, fixed on me, flickered with a brief, agonizing moment of what looked like recognition, or perhaps a memory. The wail came again, louder, more insistent, and this time I could feel a faint vibration in the floorboards beneath my feet, as if something small and frantic was moving beneath the house. The spectral woman's form began to waver, her silent scream replaced by a faint, almost imperceptible whisper that seemed to come from deep within her spectral chest. "My child." She gazed shifted from me, her hollow eyes darting towards the source of the wail. The sorrow in her expression deepened, twisting into a desperate agony. Her translucent hand, instead of reaching for me, began to pull back, slowly, reluctantly. This was my chance. The wail, the child's cry, was distracting her. It was a lifeline.
With a surge of adrenaline, I broke free from my paralysis. I didn't run towards the door, I ran towards the back of the drawing room, towards a heavy velvet curtain that covered what looked like a large archway. It was a desperate gamble, a blind dash into the unknown, but anything was better than facing the spectral woman's silent torment. I tore through the curtain, stumbling into a long, dark corridor. The air here was even colder, and the metallic scent was overpowering, like standing in a slaughterhouse. The wail was deafening now, reverberating off the stone walls, a raw, desperate sound that tore at my soul. My flashlight beam cut through the absolute darkness, revealing a narrow, winding passage that sloped downwards. It felt like descending into the very bowels of the earth. The walls were rough-hewn stone, damp and slick with an unseen moisture. The EMF meter was screaming incessantly, a constant high-pitched whine. The wail led me on, a horrifying beacon in the darkness. It was coming from a small wooden door at the end of the passage. The door was old, weathered, and covered in what looked like ancient, dried bloodstains. I pushed it open. The room beyond was small, circular, and utterly desolate. In the center, on a cold stone slab, lay a single, tiny, skeletal hand. It was impossibly small, the bones delicate, almost translucent, and beside it, a tarnished silver locket. The wail stopped abruptly. The silence that followed was heavy, suffocating. And then, I saw her, not the spectral woman, but another figure, smaller, hunched over the stone slab. It was a child, a young girl, no older than 7 or 8. Her form was translucent, shimmering like the woman's, but her eyes, though hollow, held a spark of something else, not despair, but a profound, unending loneliness. She looked up as I entered, her head tilting. Her mouth was open, but no sound came out. She was the source of the wail, a silent, eternal cry of sorrow. And then, the spectral woman appeared behind her, her form coalescing, her hollow eyes fixed on the child. The sorrow on her face was heartbreaking. "My child," she whispered again, this time with a faint, breathy sound, as if forming a word for the first time in a century. It was a mother and her lost child, trapped in this house, eternally searching for each other, forever separated by a veil of death and despair. The metallic scent, the blood, the fire, it all clicked into place. A tragedy, a brutal loss had bound them here. The child, the cold lady as the legends called her, slowly raised her skeletal hand, pointing at the locket on the slab. I understood. This was what they wanted. This was the key. With trembling hands, I reached for the locket. It was cold, surprisingly heavy. I opened it. Inside, faded and almost illegible, were 2 miniature portraits. A beautiful young woman and a smiling child. The Blackwood family.
As I held the locket open, a soft, warm light began to emanate from it, growing brighter, filling the small, circular room. The spectral forms of the mother and child began to glow, their translucent figures becoming more defined, less ethereal. The sorrow in their eyes began to fade, replaced by a profound, peaceful calm. The wail, the whisper, the oppressive cold, the metallic scent, they all began to recede, replaced by a gentle warmth, a feeling of peace that settled over the room. The house itself seemed to sigh, a long, drawn-out exhalation of centuries of suffering. The mother and child reached for each other, their translucent hands passing through one another, yet somehow connecting. A faint, ethereal smile touched the spectral woman's lips. The child's hollow eyes closed, and a single, silent tear, a tear of peace, seemed to fall from her cheek. Then, slowly, gracefully, they began to fade. Their forms became more and more transparent, dissolving into the warm light emanating from the locket. They didn't vanish in a burst of energy or a sudden disappearance. They simply became one with the light, ascending, finally free. The light from the locket dimmed, then extinguished. The room was dark again, but the oppressive cold was gone. The metallic scent had vanished. The EMF meter was silent. I stood there for a long moment, the locket still clutched in my hand, the silence profound, but no longer terrifying. It was a peaceful silence, a silence of rest. I walked back through the winding passage, up the stairs, and through the drawing room. The door, which had been stubbornly locked, now swung open with a gentle creak. The draped furniture no longer seemed menacing. The house felt empty. Not empty of life, but empty of the suffering that had clung to it for so long. I stepped out of Blackwood Manor into the first light of dawn. The air was crisp and clean, carrying the scent of pine and damp earth, not blood and decay. The ancient oak trees still stood guard, but their branches no longer looked like grasping claws. The house, though still old and grand, no longer loomed with malevolence. It was just a house. I got into my truck, the silver cross in my pocket feeling heavier, more significant. I still didn't understand everything, not truly. The mechanics of how a locket could free trapped souls, or what exactly had changed the previous inhabitants, but I had witnessed something profound, something that transcended science and logic. As I drove away, I didn't look back in the rearview mirror. There was no need. The crimson glow was gone. The screaming face was gone. Blackwood Manor had finally found its peace. And so, in a way, had I. I was still Elias Thorne, seeker of truths, but now I carried a different kind of truth within me. The quiet, chilling knowledge that some echoes, once heard, can finally be laid to rest.